Carl Jung once said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But what he didn't add, though it's implied in all his work, is that one of the greatest obstacles to accepting ourselves is our compulsive need to fix everyone else. We live in a culture that has romanticized self-sacrifice to the point of pathology. We've been conditioned to believe that being a good person means having no boundaries, that spiritual growth means endless giving, and that if we're not constantly available to help others, we're somehow deficient in compassion. But Jung would call this exactly what it is: a psychological defense mechanism, a way of avoiding the difficult work of our own individuation by projecting our need for healing onto others. Let me be direct with you. When you compulsively rescue others, when you can't say no, when you drain yourself trying to save people who don't want to be saved, you're not being compassionate. You're running from your own shadow. The shadow, in Jungian terms, is the unconscious aspect of our personality that the conscious ego doesn't identify with. It's everything we've repressed, denied, or refused to acknowledge about ourselves. And here's what's fascinating. Our excessive need to help others is often our shadow attempting to resolve its own unmet needs through external means. When you cannot stop helping someone who refuses to help themselves, ask yourself this question: what part of me am I trying to save through them? Today, I want to share with you 7 archetypes of people who will prevent your psychological development if you continue to pour your energy into them. These aren't moral judgments, they're patterns, universal patterns that Jung identified in the collective unconscious. And recognizing them is essential for your own journey toward wholeness. Type 1. The Eternal Child, the Puer Aeternus. Jung wrote extensively about the Puer Aeternus, the eternal child. This is the person who refuses to grow up, who remains psychologically dependent, who expects the world to mother them indefinitely. In mythology, this archetype appears as Peter Pan, the boy who never grows up. In real life, they're the person who's always in crisis, always needs rescuing, always has someone else handling their responsibilities. Now, understand something crucial here. The pure isn't necessarily young in age. You can be 60 years old and still be operating from this archetype. The defining characteristic is a refusal to individuate, to separate from the collective, to take responsibility for one's own psychological development. When you help the eternal child, you're not helping them mature. You're becoming the great mother archetype, the devouring mother who keeps her children dependent. Jung warned that the mother complex, when negative, creates adults who cannot function independently, who remain forever seeking someone to take care of them. Every time you pay their bills, solve their problems, or rescue them from the consequences of their choices, you're reinforcing their psychological regression. You're telling their unconscious, you don't need to grow. Someone will always be here to carry you. But here's the deeper truth. Your compulsion to help them comes from your own shadow. Perhaps you carry the rejected child within you, and saving them is your unconscious attempt to save that part of yourself. Or perhaps you need to be needed, and their dependence serves your ego's hunger for importance. The eternal child will drain you until you're empty, and they'll never mature, because maturation requires confronting the self, the totality of the psyche, and that confrontation is painful. It requires what Jung called the dark night of the soul, and you cannot experience that for them. Type 2. The persona without substance. Jung distinguished between the persona, the mask we wear for the world, and the authentic self beneath it. The healthy person develops a functional persona, while remaining connected to their inner truth. But some people become nothing but persona. There's no one home beneath the mask. These are the people who are perpetually ungrateful because they've never developed genuine interiority. They cannot appreciate what they receive because appreciation requires depth, requires feeling, requires the capacity to be touched by life. And they've armored themselves against all of that. In Jungian terms, they've identified entirely with their persona and repressed everything else into the shadow. They're hollow, and no matter what you give them, it falls into that hollowness and disappears. I once worked with a woman who constantly gave to her sister money, time, emotional support, everything, and the sister never once expressed genuine gratitude. The woman came to me in despair, asking why her sister was so cold. But as we explored her psyche, something emerged. The woman herself struggled with receiving. She couldn't accept gifts, compliments, or help without intense discomfort. Her compulsion to give to an ungrateful person was her shadow's way of punishing herself, of confirming her unconscious belief that she didn't deserve reciprocity. The ungrateful person is showing you your own relationship with reception. They're a mirror for your shadow material around worthiness and reciprocity. Jung would say, stop trying to fill the vessel that has no bottom. Instead, ask yourself why you keep pouring into it. What are you avoiding in your own psyche? Type 3. The inflated ego. In Jungian psychology, ego inflation occurs when the ego identifies with an archetype, rather than serving as the center of consciousness. The inflated person believes they are special, chosen, above ordinary human struggles. They're not suffering from too much ego. They're suffering from possession by an archetypal energy they can't integrate. These are the arrogant and self-righteous people. They don't want your help. They want you to confirm their inflation. They want witnesses to their specialness, not teachers who might puncture their grandiosity. Jung observed that inflation always precedes a fall. The psyche seeks balance. When the ego inflates, the shadow grows proportionally, and eventually the person will be confronted with their repressed darkness. It's inevitable. It's the psyche's self-regulation. When you try to help an inflated person, you're interfering with this natural process. You're trying to prevent the fall that they desperately need, because it's only in the fall, in the confrontation with their shadow, that they can begin the real work of integration. I've seen this pattern repeatedly in spiritual communities. Someone has a powerful experience, a glimpse of the transcendent, and they immediately inflate. They believe they're enlightened. They start teaching others. They gather followers. And the people who enable this, who become disciples to the inflated person, are often running from their own inflation. They're afraid of their own power, so they project it onto someone else and worship it there. The inflated person needs to fall, and your job is not to catch them. Your job is to maintain your own psychological boundaries so you don't get caught in their gravitational field. Type 4. The shadow possessed. Jung spent his entire career exploring the shadow, the dark side of the personality. He understood that we all have shadow material, repressed aspects of ourselves that live in the unconscious. The healthy person gradually integrates their shadow through conscious work. But some people don't integrate it. They become identified with it, possessed by it. These are what the original script called wicked people. But Jung would frame it differently. These are individuals who have completely surrendered to their shadow, who act out the darkest impulses without any ego mediation. In mythology, These are the tricksters gone malignant, the demons, the destroyers. In real life, they're the people who lie pathologically, manipulate systematically, harm others without remorse. Now here's what Jung would emphasize. When you encounter someone who is shadow-possessed, they will constellate your own shadow. They'll bring out the darkness in you. You'll find yourself becoming suspicious, manipulative, defensive. You'll start operating from your own shadow to protect yourself. This is what Jung called participation mystique, the unconscious identification between psyches. When you try to help someone who's shadow-possessed, you don't lift them into the light. You descend into the darkness with them. I'm not suggesting we demonize these individuals. Jung never did. He maintained that even the darkest shadow material can potentially be integrated. But here's the key. That integration must come from within. It requires a conscious ego strong enough to confront and contain the shadow. And if they don't have that, if they're completely identified with their darkness, then your presence won't help. It will only give the shadow more energy to work with. The shadow-possessed person doesn't need your compassion. They need consequences. They need the external world to reflect back to them the destruction they're creating. And if you shield them from those consequences, you're not helping them. You're helping their shadow. Type 5. The unconscious fool. Jung made a crucial distinction between different types of unconsciousness. There's the natural unconsciousness of the infant, which is simply preconscious. There's the unconsciousness of the person actively engaged in individuation, who's accessing deep unconscious material to integrate. And then there's what he called the unconsciousness of the fool, the person who refuses consciousness. The fool makes the same mistakes repeatedly, not because they can't learn, but because they won't learn. Learning requires consciousness, requires paying attention, requires allowing experience to transform you. The fool resists all of this. In Jungian terms, the fool has erected massive defenses against consciousness. Perhaps consciousness is too painful. Perhaps their childhood taught them that awareness brings suffering. Whatever the reason, they've made a fundamental decision. I will not see. And here's what you must understand. You cannot make the unconscious conscious for someone else. This is the central work of individuation, and it can only be done by the individual themselves. Jung said that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. The fool is in neurosis, caught in repetitive patterns because they're avoiding the legitimate suffering that would come with consciousness. And when you rescue them, you're helping them avoid that suffering. You're participating in their neurosis. I've watched family members spend decades trying to wake up the fool in their lives. The alcoholic who keeps losing jobs, the person who keeps entering abusive relationships, the individual who makes terrible financial decisions over and over. And the family members exhaust themselves, sacrifice their own development, trying to force consciousness on someone who fundamentally doesn't want it. Jung would say, let them sleep. Consciousness cannot be forced. It can only be chosen. And the choice only comes when the pain of unconsciousness finally exceeds the pain of waking up. Type 6. The shapeshifter. In Jungian psychology, the trickster archetype appears in every culture's mythology. The trickster is the shapeshifter, the one who changes form, who manipulates reality, who operates outside normal boundaries. In its positive aspect, the trickster brings necessary change and challenges rigidity. In its negative aspect, it becomes the manipulator, the one who uses deception and emotional manipulation to control others. The master manipulator is the trickster archetype in its malignant form. They don't have a stable sense of self. They become whoever they need to be to get what they want. They read people with uncanny accuracy and mirror back exactly what that person needs to see. Jung would recognize this immediately as someone with severe ego fragmentation. They don't have a central organizing principle of the psyche. They're all persona, all masks, with no authentic self beneath. And here's what's crucial. They're extremely attracted to people who are engaged in genuine individuation work, because people on the individuation journey are opening themselves up, becoming more vulnerable, more authentic. And this openness makes them perfect targets. The manipulator will sense your hunger for meaning, for connection, for purpose. And they'll present themselves as the answer to that hunger. They'll become your twin flame, your soul connection, your destined partner in some great work. But it's all theater. It's all strategic. And the moment you're no longer useful, the mask drops, and you see that there was never anyone really there. When you help a manipulator, you're not helping a person. You're feeding a complex, a pattern of psychological functioning that's designed entirely for exploitation. Jung would say, you're giving energy to a disintegrated psyche that will only use that energy to continue avoiding integration. Type 7, the one who refuses the call. Joseph Campbell, deeply influenced by Jung, wrote about the hero's journey. Every hero's journey begins with a call to adventure, a summons to growth and transformation. And every hero initially refuses that call. The refusal is natural, even necessary. It's the ego's last defense before it surrenders to the deeper forces of the self. But some people refuse permanently. They hear the call, they understand what's being asked of them, and they consciously, deliberately, turn away. These are the unrepentant rebels, the ones who know better but refuse to do better. In Jungian terms, they're experiencing what he called inflation of the negative kind. They've identified with their refusal. It's become their identity. Jung would say, this is one of the most difficult psychological positions to shift because it's not rooted in unconsciousness. It's rooted in a conscious choice to remain unconscious, a deliberate rejection of the self's call toward wholeness. I've seen this in people who've had powerful spiritual experiences, moments of clarity where they saw exactly what they needed to change, and they consciously chose not to change. They preferred their familiar suffering to the unknown territory of transformation. And often, they're surrounded by people who keep hoping, keep believing that one more conversation, one more intervention will make the difference. But it won't, because the person has made a fundamental decision at the deepest level of their being. I will not individuate. I will not become who I'm meant to be. Jung was clear about this. Individuation cannot be forced. It's a natural process, but it requires cooperation. It requires the conscious ego to work in partnership with the unconscious. And when someone refuses that partnership, all you can do is witness their refusal and step back. So what do we do? Jung's entire psychology is about becoming conscious, about withdrawing our projections, about recognizing that what we see in others is often our own shadow material. So when you encounter these 7 types, the first question isn't, how do I help them? The first question is, what is my compulsion to help them showing me about myself? Are you trying to rescue someone as a way of avoiding your own need for healing? Are you projecting your own disowned potential onto them? Are you inflating yourself through being needed? Are you avoiding your own individuation work by focusing on theirs? Jung said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. These difficult people, these energy vampires, these draining relationships, they're not random. They're mirrors. They're showing you exactly where you need to do your own shadow work. True compassion, from a Jungian perspective, isn't about endless giving. It's about recognizing the other person's inherent capacity for their own individuation journey. It's about respecting their unconscious process, even when that process includes struggle and suffering. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is withdraw your helping hand. Not with anger or judgment, but with the recognition that they have their own relationship with the self, with the totality of their psyche. And your interference might actually be preventing that relationship from developing. Jung worked with patients for years, sometimes decades, but he also knew when to end treatment. He knew when his presence was becoming a crutch, when the patient needed to face life without him. And he had the strength to step back. This is what I'm asking you to develop. The psychological strength to withdraw your energy from those who will only drain it without transformation. Not because you don't care, but because you understand that consciousness cannot be given, only chosen. Your energy is sacred, your time is limited, your psychological resources are finite. And the work of individuation, your own journey toward wholeness, requires everything you have. So ask yourself, who am I helping as a way of avoiding my own shadow work? Who am I rescuing as a projection of my own need for rescue? Who am I trying to individuate on behalf of because I'm afraid of my own individuation journey? And when you find the answer, have the courage to withdraw. Have the strength to say, this is your journey, not mine. I cannot walk it for you. Because in the end, Jung's entire message can be summarized in one statement. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And you cannot become who you truly are if you're spending all your energy trying to make others become who they're meant to be. That's their work. And this, the work of your own becoming, is yours. Like, subscribe, and share.